Okay, so let's talk about the sprint review. First of all, what is the sprint review? It's the opportunity for the Scrum team to inspect and adapt to their product, right? This is where we get together to look at the value we're delivering and say, okay, is this okay? Are we going in a good direction? How can we do it better? So to inspect and adapt product. Now, what's the time box for the sprint review? According to Scrum, for a 1-month sprint, you have 4 hours for a sprint review. So here you're thinking about 1 hour per week of sprint. Who needs to be there? Well, clearly the Scrum team needs to be there, right? It's an opportunity to learn about the product. And yes, this means the entire Scrum team. Also for the developers, any feedback that the stakeholders are giving is valuable to hear because it's their product. And that feedback is going to help them make it better next sprint. Also, the key stakeholders have to be there at least. These are the key people impacted by our product. We need them there so they can give us feedback and make sure that we're going in the right direction. And of course, the sprint review is a public event. So anybody else impacted or interested by our product can also join. Now, we know the Scrum team is there. That means the product owner also. Now let's think about it. Imagine like if we have an arrow over here. On the left side of the arrow are the people presenting the value, the increment, the thing we delivered, okay? On the right side of the arrow are the people receiving that presentation, thinking about it, and giving some feedback. So the question is, where is the product owner? On the left side or on the right side? And no, the middle is not an option. Think about it. The product owner is on the left side, together with the Scrum team. If the product owner is on the right side together with the stakeholders, this is already going to create a certain imbalance that's not natural. If the developers are presenting to the product owner on the other side, that means the product owner is looking at it for the first time. That's incredibly risky. You just spent 2 weeks of work and you're going to check at the end if it's okay or not. If it's not okay, you lose the sprint. The product owner should be checking if things are going okay during the sprint. He or she is part of the Scrum team and is collaborating with the developers to deliver value. So the product owner is presenting together with the developers to the stakeholders. Here's what we built this sprint. What do you think about it? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the agenda. What happens in the sprint planning? Well, the first thing we're going to be discussing, of course, is the increment, right? So we have going to have a demo and a feedback. This connects to the first input we bring into the sprint review. So what does the Scrum team bring into the sprint review? The increment, the thing they delivered, the PBIs they managed to get done. During this demo and feedback, the Scrum team can also share any insights they gained this sprint by working on that increment. Now, some Scrum teams only do this in the sprint review. They only show the increment, get some feedback, and move on. You should be doing a lot more in the sprint review. Remember, in Scrum, all you need are the 4 events. So if you get together with your stakeholders to review the increment at the end of the sprint, you should be discussing other things than just the demo and feedback. For example, progress. How are we moving along in our plan? Are we on track or not? And if we're not, what are we going to do about it? Another thing we want to do together with the stakeholders is, based on this progress and based on the demo and feedback and the insights we've gained in the sprint review so far, does this impact our priorities? Does this impact what we're working on next sprint? Remember, this is your last opportunity to adapt priorities for the next sprint. Take advantage of it. Also, it's a good opportunity to discuss other things like risks, budget, impacting the product. Remember, this is the product team, the Scrum team plus stakeholders together to inspect and adapt the product. So things like that should also be part of the discussion. What's the key output of the sprint review? Once the Scrum team got together with the stakeholders to go through these items in the agenda, what is generated at the end? Essentially, a clear, prioritized product backlog. We know what to do next based on the feedback just received. Now, let's talk about some challenges, tips, and tricks for the sprint review. One of the first challenges I see is what we mentioned in the beginning, when the product owner is on the right side. When the product owner is seeing the increment for the first time in the sprint review, there are a couple of dysfunctionalities that are going to happen. First, the developers are getting feedback too late. There's nothing they can do this sprint based on that feedback. It's only going to impact the next sprint. The second dysfunctionality is that, think about it. If you're the product owner and you're seeing the increment for the first time, are you going to invite your boss to that sprint review? The VP? Of course not, because you don't want to be embarrassed in front of them in case the increment is not good. So what you see happening in those cases is we start to have the developers presenting to the product owner in the sprint review, and then the product owner going to talk to the stakeholders some other time and getting the feedback there. And this generates a lot of problems because the stakeholders get feedback, product owner has to go back to developers, and you see how much time we're losing. We should be discussing this all together in the sprint review. 3 tips here for running good sprint reviews. The first thing I would say is try to keep it short. One of the complaints I hear from a lot of Scrum teams is their stakeholders don't show up to the sprint review. Well, if you're doing a 2-hour sprint review, for example, every 2 weeks, it's more difficult for them to join. you need to be mindful of the commitment you're asking from them. The shorter you can make your sprint review while keeping it effective, the higher the likelihood that all your key stakeholders are going to make the time commitment necessary to show up every sprint. The second tip I have here is to keep it real. What I mean here is make sure the context is clear. I'll give a simple example. I was working with a team once that was building an app, and it was targeted at young professionals. And in our first sprint review, this was in a bank, one of the key stakeholders, an older gentleman, gave the feedback that they didn't like the design of the app. Now, if the Scrum team hadn't called him out on the fact that he was actually not the target market, if they had not challenged him, they would have taken that feedback, adapted the design, and actually maybe moved further away from their target market. The job of the product owner there is to remind the stakeholders of the problem they're solving, of the context. We're targeting young professionals, and here's what we're trying to do this sprint. If that context is clear, then the stakeholders place themselves in that context and are giving valid feedback. The third tip I would give here is to keep it fun. One of the challenges Scrum teams have in the real world is that there is a power imbalance in the sprint review. The people on the left side of the arrow, the people presenting the Scrum team, have less power than the stakeholders, and it takes on this reporting type meeting. This is a dysfunctionality. In Scrum, that hierarchy doesn't exist. We're all here to learn about how to improve the product. When you make the meeting fun, by doing little gimmicks maybe, or thinking about how to engage the stakeholders a little bit more, maybe a little icebreaker, something like that, it helps to put people on the mindset that this is a different kind of event, and what we're here to do is just have a collaborative exercise to improve the product. Okay, so that's an overview of the sprint review and how to get started with it.